Okay, and now we take the story back to old Einstein. We've got through the hard part, guys. It's that was a little statistical gibberish in there, not gibberish, but jargon, and but this is going to be a little easier. Richard Moody Jr. is a geologist, not a computational physics guy. So this article is a lot easier to digest, and I'll read this one in full. But what came to mind after reading that whole article and piecing apart Tom Roberts' rebuttal of Miller's data was that, okay, fair enough. That's a mathematically critical examination of Miller's result and saying, hey, if you're going to prove your case, it's got to be statistically significant. You've got to be able to actually measure the signal that you're claiming, and you've got to have enough resolution in your instruments to actually measure that. And I thought, you know what, that's a totally great point. And on that note, if we were to apply that same academic rigor and intellectual criticism, and scientific, validity to our, existing canon of Einsteinian relativity and special relativity, then we would find something very interesting. Is that the error bars on our conventional physics, history is a lot bigger than people understand, and it's not all entirely proven beyond. It's not settled science like they say, a global warming, all this other nonsense, right? They use settled science as an intimidation tactic for half-witted people who don't understand how to actually get into the concepts and piece them apart using their logical brain, right? So this is Richard Moody Jr., not a physicist but a geologist, a scientist, and he's done several years of research into relativity and Einstein and the basis of this whole worldview that they've built since back in 1905 when his papers came out, and specifically in 1919 when a British lord dude went down and attempted to measure the variance in light from a star as it was next to the sun during a solar eclipse, right? And they're saying that because of the gravitational fields, the gravity of the sun is going to bend the light beam from the star. And he said, oh, it should be this many arc seconds, right? And science, since that day, they took it as fact. Einstein was all over the paper, oh my goodness, Einstein proven right, Einstein vindicated. And from that point on, there were no serious challengers to relativity. All the institutional science went completely full board into the Einstein boat, and all the other boats were torpedoed, right? And what Dayton Miller represented was the last kind of gasp of the conventional physicists trying to bring to the public knowledge an effective challenge to Einstein's entirely illogical tenets of special and general relativity. Again, I'm an English major, but the more I dive into this stuff, I can't believe that these math guys can actually be so excited about Einstein. This stuff makes no sense when you get into it. It is complete absurd and based on irrational, illogical fallacies. Anyway, let's get into it. Reading the article, The Eclipse Data from 1919, The Greatest Hoax in 20th Century Science by Richard Moody Jr. And just a quick bio on Richard Moody. Richard Moody Jr. has a master's degree in geology, is the author of 3 books on chess theory, and has written for the Mensa Bulletin. For the past 4 years, he has conducted intensive research into Albert Einstein. Preface. The Gulf War was predicated on the concept of overwhelming superiority. In other words, the Allies didn't resort to the minimum number of troops and support personnel to do the job. They vastly exceeded the minimum. Science is war. This paper is predicated on the principle of overwhelming scientific superiority. A similar approach was used by Woodward and Bernstein when they took on the Nixon White House. They didn't just get enough information to get the job done, they went well beyond that. It is believed here that the need to overwhelm the reader is a sad necessity brought about by the corruption and derogation of science that has taken place in the previous century. Abstract. Prior to 1919, general relativity was an obscure theory by a rising star in physics, Albert Einstein. Based on the perceived need to test this complex and intriguing concept, it was held as gospel that the sunlight passing by the sun should be bent by the gravitational attraction of the sun, something known to as Sir Isaac Newton and modified by Einstein. According to prevailing wisdom, this should be observable during a total solar eclipse when the shielding of the sun's light permitted the observation of light from distant stars being bent around the sun. In an effort to play the role of peacemaker and kingmaker, Arthur Eddington traveled to Principe in Africa with the express purpose of proving Einstein right. Prior to that, he was an advocate for Einstein, due in part to the fact that both men shared the same political beliefs, pacifism. In his zeal to be both peacemaker and kingmaker, Eddington wanted to be known as the man who discovered Einstein. Eddington engaged in corruption and derogation of the scientific data, the scientific method, and much of the scientific community. To this day, this completely manufactured data set is quoted by prominent scientists and the organs of publication. It surpasses the Piltdown fraud as the greatest hoax of 20th and 21st century science. I don't know, with global warming. Anyway, introduction. Hero worship may seem harmless to some. In the case of Einstein, it has had disastrous consequences for the scientific community. Let us start with perhaps the worst cover-up and brewing scandal science has seen in the 20th and 21st century. I am referring to the hoax of 1919, otherwise known as the eclipse data from 1919, hereinafter referred as the eclipse. Einstein's dubious science led other scientists to disgrace themselves for the express purpose of proving Einstein right about general relativity. It is almost unimaginable to ponder just how bad reputable scientists are when it comes to understanding the limitations of scientific instruments, the limits of the physical conditions under which data is collected, and a complete lack of understanding of the logic behind the various predictions for the deflection of light. These scientists don't appear to understand what the scientific method is or how to apply it. According to Graf, strong models are like crude filters, readily admitting data is consistent with the theory and systematically rejecting data inconsistent with the theory. This results in a feedback loop between the corrupted and derogated data to the strong model. They reinforce each other. This has been the case for general relativity. It went from an obscure concept from a somewhat obscure scientist to the reigning paradigm overnight, dominating thinking in theoretical physics over the past half-century. Strong models corrupt weak men and women. The desire to conform is almost as strong as the desire to create. Strong models discourage free and independent thought. Where wealth, power, and prestige come into play, they serve as club to beat back promising alternatives. General relativity is just such a model. I have also drawn the analogy between strong models and the queen bee syndrome. The first official act of any queen bee when she recognizes what she is to immediately kill off any potential rivals. This is how strong models operate. Consider this observation from Ian McCausland. In spite of the fact that the experimental evidence for relativity seems to have been very flimsy in 1919, Einstein's enormous fame has remained intact, and his theory has ever since been held to be one of the highest achievements of human thought. The resulting deification of Einstein has had some unfortunate effects. Critics of his theory are often dismissed as cranks, and the search for better theories has been inhibited. It is suggested that the announcement of the eclipse observations in 1919 was not a triumph of science, as it is often portrayed, but rather an obstacle to objective consideration of alternatives. Einstein's enormous and enduring fame resulted directly from the announcement of the eclipse results, although the results were not particularly accurate. This final sentiment is shared by Sir John Maddox, editor emeritus of Nature magazine. Because of the euphoric veneration of Einstein and relativity in November 1919, the objectivity with which science is supposed to act has been inhibited. Canonization, deification, and claims of personal communications from nature should have no place in science. If the findings of the eclipse expeditions had been announced as being inconclusive instead of decisive in 1919, general relativity would have had to compete with other possible theories. It is also reasonable to ask whether the rapid and strong entrenchment of the general theory that occurred as a result of the eclipse announcement may have led experimenters to obtain the right answers from their observations, as suggested in the above quotation from Sciama. Strong models corrupt the data. Global warming. This failure to recognize and promote alternatives to existing paradigms in astrophysics is so severe that 33 prominent scientists have found it necessary to decry the state of funding there. Want money? Just come up with a new way to test general relativity. Want to test other theories? Forget it. You're not getting any funding. Existing models derive funding in this country because the old guard benefits in terms of wealth, power, and prestige by promoting the status quo. There is tremendous scientific inertia today, and as a result, it is getting progressively more difficult to break ties to a comfortable past. Let us put things in historical perspective. As of 1919, general relativity was an obscure theory of a rising star Einstein. The Quaker, Eddington, approved of Einstein's political leanings, i.e. both men were pacifists and Eddington thought Einstein was a genius. He is reputed to have said only 3 people understand general relativity, and for the life of me, I don't know who the third one is. As followed of the eclipse, Einstein awoke in Berlin on the morning of November 7, 1919, to find himself famous. So Eddington set out to Precipe in Africa in 1919 with the express purpose of proving Einstein right. No supporters of Einstein appear to be fazed by the fact that Eddington was an advocate for Einstein, not some objective scientist. Eddington took his role as the great peacemaker and kingmaker very seriously. He attempted to calm the antipathy British and German scientists shared. It was not without international significance, for it opportunely put an end to wild talk of boycotting German science. Later, Eddington said, "By standing foremost in testing and ultimately verifying the enemy theory, our national observatory kept alive the finest traditions of science, and the lesson is still perhaps needed today." In other words, if you can get others to buy into bad science, it is in the finest tradition of science. Eddington engaged in the corruption and derogation of science that persists to this day, and he had the arrogance to tell others that this is in the finest tradition of science. According to the great Indian astronomer Chandrasekhar, had he been left to himself, he, Eddington, would not have planned the expedition, since he was fully convinced of the truth of the general theory of relativity. Paul Marmot has done a marvelous job showing the fundamental hypocrisy of Eddington. This clearly qualifies Eddington as one of the worst scientists in all of 20th century science, because he has polluted the mainstream of science for almost a century and, like the Pied Piper of Hamelin, led the rats to the sea. Although the material was very meager compared with what we had hoped for, the writer, who it must be admitted was not altogether unbiased, believed it was convincing. We will see how the star's distribution was not good enough for such measurements to be convincing. Finally, we will discuss how Eddington's influence worked for Einstein's full displacement and against any other result. Also in the Marmot article, Eddington was deferred with the express stipulation that if the war should end by May 1919, then Eddington should undertake to lead an expedition for the purpose of verifying Einstein's predictions. You will note that he said verifying, not testing. This begs the question, what is science? According to Sakharov, we regard as scientific a method based on deep analysis of facts, theories, and views, presupposing unprejudiced, unfearing open discussion and conclusions. How does this have any relevance to the eclipse? Was there any adherence to any of these principles? Einstein completely waffled as far as he came up with the values he obtained for the purported values of the deflection of light. Eddington promptly cooked the data, and the supporters of Einstein have attempted to portray dissenters to any of Einstein's theories as crackpots. The number of reputable scientists who have bought into this whole farce looks like a who's who of prominent scientists. For example, Eddington completely bamboozled the Royal Society and the Royal Astronomical Society at his triumphant talk he gave to them. Sir Joseph Thomson, president of the Royal Society and chair of the meeting, strongly endorsed the results. It does not appear that any scientist present actually looked at the photographic plates. The whole affair was more like a coronation rather than a scientific presentation. E.g., Pais stated, "the day on which Einstein was canonized." Pathological science. These eclipse photographic plates were supposed to show that starlight was bent by the sun as the light passed by it during a total solar eclipse. The predicted Newton deflection was supposed to be 0.87 arc seconds, and the Einstein deflection, a totally ad hoc amount, was supposed to be 1.73 arc seconds. Unfortunately, the effect was so small it is impossible to detect accurately, even with the strongest modern telescopes under ideal conditions. This is the true meaning of, quote, pathological science as defined by Langmuir. Unlike cold fusion, which has been demonstrated to produce heat reliably in a short period of time in high-energy particles, the same cannot be said of the eclipse data. Cromer said it best with regard to pathological science. Real discoveries of phenomena contrary to all previous scientific existence are very rare, while fraud, fakery, foolishness, and error resulting from overenthusiasm and delusion are all too common. Isn't this a great description of the eclipse data? Physicists have branded cold fusion as pathological science. Let's see how they like having the eclipse data defined as pathological science. What do eclipse researchers do? In a vain attempt to prove that Einstein was right, they measure minute changes beyond the capabilities of their equipment, the physical conditions that they encounter, or their recording device, the photographic plates. This is truly the type example of pathological science. This is not a problem, as we will show that the deflection is certainly not measurable. What is clearly evident is that the expedition to Principe in Africa was doomed to failure before Eddington set foot there, because neither the equipment nor the conditions permitted precisions necessary to distinguish between the Newtonian deflection and the Einstein deflection. The error caused by the atmospheric turbulence is large enough to refute any measurement of the so-called Einstein effect. Eddington's overenthusiastic advocacy may perhaps be explained by his prior conviction that the theory was true and by his interest in saving something from the vast work of the Principe expedition. But one retains the suspicion that besides these reasons, there was, especially for Eddington, another: the hope that a British verification of Einstein's theory would force on British scientists a more open-minded and generous attitude towards their German colleagues. Skeptical Inquirer. However, when it comes to fraud, fakery, and overenthusiasm and delusion, Cromer should start with his own journal, the Skeptical Inquirer. They maintain that they are the magazine for science and reason. In a special edition, they compare Einstein to Jesus Christ and Moses. On the cover, they morph a picture of Einstein on the left to a man with a halo on the right, obviously intended to be Jesus Christ. So this great bastion of reason has swallowed hook, line, and sinker all the cockamamie misinformation from big physics without any skepticism whatsoever. They are great at debunking others. Why don't they start by debunking themselves? They have even portrayed Einstein as Moses in a cartoon on page 34 with a finger coming out of a cloud pointing to writing on a stone tablet that reads, "And God said, let there be light." Just like Moses, Einstein got a stone tablet. Einstein is seen writing the equation E equals mc squared on a chalkboard. The clear implication is that Einstein was inspired by God when he came up with the equation. This is the first time I have heard Poincaré described as God. What the editors of the Skeptical Inquirer don't seem to realize is this: Einstein did not originate the equation. He did not derive it. He did not originate the idea of the conversion of matter into light. At least 7 scientists came up with the idea of converting matter into energy or light before Einstein. He did not originate the conversion factor c squared. The equation as written is wrong. E is proportional to mc squared, not equal to mc squared. Einstein violated the conservation of energy law when he has a candle emitting a wavelength of light and gaining mass at the same time. Aside from that, the editors of SI are absolutely correct in claiming that Einstein got his inspiration from God. Mensa Bulletin. Mensa Bulletin published a pro-Einstein article on E equals mc squared called The Human Story Behind E equals mc squared. The book is called E equals mc squared, a biography of the world's most famous equation. The book is said to be superbly researched by the Dallas Morning News. This book is a very well-researched novel. Of course, Mr. Bodanis missed all of the information missed by Skeptical Inquirer. In a typical act of puffery, the introduction of the Bodanis article stated, "He paints a series of colorful pictures of the heroes of science who paved the way for Einstein's amazing leap of intellect." What precisely did those heroes of science do that was heroic? Catch a piece of chalk before it fell to the ground and shattered, or save an equation from a burning building? Now for the amazing leap of intellect. He read and understood the papers by Poincaré and Newton. Where were the editors of the Mensa Bulletin when Bodanis was writing this balderdash? Why did Mr. Bodanis get so much wrong about E equals mc squared? The following statement from his book provides a very telling clue. Einstein and his wife had given away their first child, a daughter born before they were married. Isn't that positively innocent? Don't all parents give away their children when they run into financial difficulties? Here is another way to characterize the facts. Einstein fathered an illegitimate child he abandoned. Same set of facts, different spin. Bodanis chose the former, which is an indication that this was going to be a soft-hitting book. Scientific American. What was the precision Eddington was claiming with primitive equipment operating under extremely hostile conditions with agile stars on a mobile, fault-riddled photographic template? 1/100th of an arcsecond. Apparently, this doesn't bother the editors of Scientific American, who have reaffirmed the accuracy and precision of the eclipse data. SA provides a nexus of science with the intelligent lay public. Wouldn't one expect caution by the editors of Scientific American when they know there is a controversy about the quality of the eclipse data? The title of the article in question is, "Did Researchers Cook Data from the First Test of General Relativity? Rumors of data mishandling in an historic eclipse study don't jibe." With this simple observation, Scientific American has given its stamp of approval to the lowest quality data probably in the history of science. This raises serious doubts about the integrity, credibility, competence, and objectivity of essay editors. They appear to be little more than shills for Eddington and indirectly for Einstein. If they misinform their readers, then they contribute to the vast amount of scientific illiteracy plaguing America. We are told in this article, who discovered that the Royal Observatory staff in Greenwich had reanalyzed the Sobral data in 1978 using modern computer-based methods. My goodness, they plan to use a computer to turn a sow's ear into a silk purse by magically repealing the laws of astronomy. Somehow, with modern computer-based methods, we are going to take data not even precise to 1 arc minute and convert this into data with a precision of 1/100th of an arc second. Aren't computers wonderful? They can provide you with any answer you want. The allowable precision is probably on the order of several arc minutes. In other words, the precision was read by Eddington and Scientific American to perhaps 1,000 times 10,000 times that permissible from the various sources of errors. This is fully in keeping with the work of the British Institute of Precise Physics, who maintain they used 10-section exposure cameras accurate to less than 1/25th of a degree. Boldface from original text. The authors are referring to the errors introduced by the Earth's rotation. Although there was an attempt to deal with this problem, what kind of machinery would it have taken to exactly match the rotation so that the mirror could be rotated to compensate for the rotation of the Earth during a time exposure, instead of rotating the telescope, which was not feasible under the conditions of the eclipse expeditions? The resulting uncertainty of exactly matching the rotation of the Earth to the machinery could have introduced poorer precision of over several arc seconds. This is just one source of error. Time magazine and Stephen Hawking. This now brings us to Sir Stephen Hawking. Professor Hawking did not exhibit the kind of decorum one would hope to get from a Nobel laureate and heir apparent to Einstein. Professor Hawking had a fiduciary responsibility to provide the public with unbiased factual information so that they can understand and appreciate the work of scientists. Professor Hawking was in the powerful position of battling a fatal disease, all the while being a cherished figure within the public and is held in high regard by physicists, an icon. As someone who believes in the intent of the Americans with Disabilities Act, I should not be criticized for questioning Professor Hawking's integrity. He should not be exempt from criticism just because he is in a wheelchair. I sent an email to Professor Hawking through his press secretary. I asked Professor Hawking to justify discrepancies within his writings. I got no response. I am sure all handicapped individuals would find it offensive for me to pull my punches just because Hawking can't defend himself. With all due respect to Professor Hawking, when one makes dubious statements that have a direct result of wildly misinforming the public, then you will pay the price as a hit on your integrity. Here is what Hawking said in his book, A Brief History of Time from the Big Bang to Black Holes, on page 32, with regard to the eclipse data. Their measurement had been sheer luck, or a case of knowing the result they wanted to get, not an uncommon occurrence in science. The light deflection has, however, been accurately confirmed by a number of later observations. Not according to John Maddox, editor emeritus of Nature magazine. Then in his Time magazine article, Hawking on page 79 stated it was confirmed in spectacular fashion in 1919 when a British expedition to West Africa observed a slight shift in the position of stars near the sun. Here was direct evidence that space and time are warped, the greatest change in our perception of the arena in which we live since Euclid wrote his Elements about 300 BC. Apparently, Professor Hawking forgot what he wrote in his book when he wrote this article for Time magazine. Professor Hawking gave Time magazine editors exactly what they wanted to hear. First, Einstein came up with this obscure theory, and just like that, the data flowed seamlessly and the theory was confirmed. Nothing could be further from the truth. Did Time magazine staffers do a fact check of the Hawking article, or did they just give him a pass? Perhaps if they were a little more concerned about doing research instead of puffing up Einstein, they might have discovered the discrepancy between the Hawking book and the Hawking article. What possible motive could Hawking have for these three versions of the same event? The first two repudiate the data from the eclipse. The third supports it, and thus validates support for general relativity. Who benefits by promoting Einstein's general theory of relativity? Professor Hawking is heir apparent to Einstein and thus stands to benefit the most from puffing up Einstein. He has a conflict between promoting himself and promoting science. Which did he choose? As a direct result of this puffery, physicists no doubt rubbed their hands in glee when Einstein was named Person of the Century. They could look forward to getting their research grants approved as far as the eye could see. Say the phrase, "You're no Einstein," in public and you could put $1 into the pocket of every physicist in the country. Einstein is not a man, he is a product being marketed to the American public like toothpaste and deodorant. He is a brand name with as much name recognition in science as Coke and Pepsi have in a soft drink industry. He is an advertiser's dream. He is a cash cow, a rainmaker, the 800-pound gorilla that gets fed first, and the sugar daddy of big physics. Hebrew University also makes 7 figures every year promoting Einstein goodies like bobblehead dolls. He is an industry unto himself. That is the motive for Hawking to falsify events concerning the eclipse in order to maximize wealth, power, and prestige for big physics. Time magazine had only one shot to maximize their profit from their manufactured story, The Person of the Century issue. Would they have sold as many copies of their magazine with Franklin Roosevelt on the cover? I'm sure every retiree who cashes their Social Security check or fills out their Medicare forms thanks God for Einstein's general theory of relativity. Did Time magazine poll likely buyers to see which choice would maximize their profits? All I know is that when I requested a copy of the Person of the Century issue, they were sold out. Would they have sold out the issue with Franklin Roosevelt on the cover of the magazine? Who is Time magazine's master? The public good or the stockholders of Time Warner? David Levy. How is it possible that the astronomer Dr. David Levy was totally unfamiliar with the limitations of the precision of the eclipse data? As an astronomer and public figure, like Professor Hawking, he has the fiduciary responsibility to provide an accurate, unbiased information to the American public. This is what Dr. Levy said in the Millennium Milepost No. 8 interview broadcast on Arizona Illustrated. Here is an excerpt from that broadcast. Levy. It was the end of World War I, but I think it actually goes back a bit to what you were saying about humanity is moving forward. We're exploring. That eclipse was a very interesting cultural moment. A man, Sir Arthur Eddington, an English astronomer, decided to run a little experiment. You see, there was this unknown physicist named Albert Einstein, and he had come out with a theory years earlier. This theory was that mass and energy were equivalent, a very astonishing theory. E equals mc squared. He said that part of that can be tested where you have a body that is very strong and has a huge amount of gravity, so much that it can actually bend the space around it. The energy going through that space would actually be bent. Now this was just something that philosophers would discuss, like how many angels can you put on the head of a pin? And Einstein had made this theory. There's no way of proving it, so it stays as theory. Eddington said, oh no, we can prove it, because we can observe a star very close to the sun and measure if its light has been bent because of the gravitational pull of the sun, as Einstein had predicted, and then we've got something. Then Einstein has rewritten the laws of physics. Bill, the interviewer. So all of this culminated then in 1919. Levy, in 1919. We can't normally observe a star when it is close to the sun swamps it out. During the eclipse of 1919, they observed the star. They took photographs of that star. They developed the film in a dark room, came out with the measurement that proved Einstein was correct. And so the person working in the patent office in Switzerland had suddenly rewritten the laws of physics and redefined our existence in the universe. That's why 1919 was so important. This was not just one bad night for Dr. Levy. He made similar observations in Parade magazine. According to Dr. Levy, it only takes one corrupted and derogated data point to prove a theory correct. This is the same man who is providing a public face to the scientifically illiterate average American. Einstein-isms. An Einstein-ism can be defined as the perturbation of language or perception in order to put a positive spin on some aspect of Einstein's life. It may include distortion, omission, falsification, or corruption of the historic record in order to promote Einstein. From Clark, we are told, even in form and style, the special relativity paper was unusual. It was lacking the notes and references which give weight to most serious expeditions. Einstein was writing internet-quality papers before the internet was invented. Of course, big physics has bought into this, calling Einstein's 1905 papers the miracle year. Never mind that the papers were agenda-driven, plagiarized, internet-quality papers that should have died in the review process. To physicists, this is a miracle. I wonder how responsible scientists would view them. What did Albert think about himself and his work? There have already been published by the bucketfuls such brazen lies and utter fictions about me that I would have long since gone to my grave if I had let myself pay attention to them. It strikes me as unfair and even in bad taste to select a few individuals for boundless admiration, attributing superhuman powers of mind and character to them. This has been my fate, and the contrast between the popular estimate of my powers and achievements in reality is simply grotesque. With fame I become more and more stupid, which is of course a very common phenomenon. Even Einstein was aware of the tremendous puffery around him. What is not generally recognized in the scientific community is that towards the end of his life, Einstein repudiated his life's work. On his deathbed as a scientist, Einstein made a deathbed confession, a scenario held as a highly significant legal statement. Here is what Pais said about Einstein toward the end of his life. As Einstein's life drew to a close, doubts about his vision arose in his mind. The theory of relativity and the quantum theory seem little adapted to fusion in one unified theory, he remarked in 1940. He wrote to Born, probably in 1949, "Our respective hobby horses have irretrievably run off in different directions. Even I cannot adhere to mine," with absolute confidence. In the early 1950s, he once said to me that he was not sure whether differential geometry was to be the framework for further progress, but it was then. He believed he was on the right track. To his dear friend Besso, he wrote in 1954, "I consider it quite possible that physics cannot be based on a field concept, i.e. continuous structures. In that case, nothing remains of my entire castle in the air, gravitation theory included, and of the rest of modern physics." Even when Einstein makes the worst blunder any scientist has ever made, this can only be equaled and never surpassed, the press manages to put a positive spin on it. With respect to the cosmologic constant, CC, Einstein swore he was wrong when he was probably right. The cosmologic constant was a totally ad hoc idea of Einstein's. He bought into the idea of a static universe and was concerned that gravity would collapse it into a point. So in order to keep the universe open, he came up with a totally ad hoc concept of the CC, a mysterious anti-gravity force that would keep the universe open. Along comes the data from the background radiation, and just like that, Einstein abandoned the CC because an expanding universe would obviate the need for anti-gravity to keep the universe open. Einstein promptly proclaimed that the CC was the worst mistake of his career. What is the status of the CC today? According to some investigators, the universe appears to exhibit signs of the universe accelerating instead of decelerating. This caused researchers to resurrect the idea of the cosmological constant. What caused Einstein to reject the CC? An expanding universe. What caused modern investigators to believe in the CC? An expanding universe. There is a classic story of Einstein's father giving him a compass as a young boy. This allegedly sparked Einstein's curiosity later in life. I have a different take on this story. In my version, his father reversed north and south so Einstein could find his way home. It is bad enough when you swear you're right when you're wrong. There's a whole different kettle of fish to swear you're wrong when you're right. In any discipline except physics, this would be the most mortifying experience any scientist could possibly experience. In physics, however, it is considered a rite of passage. The press claimed Einstein famously abandoned the cosmologic constant. How about infamously or absurdly abandoned the cosmologic constant? Somehow Einstein can make the worst mistake of his career and the press can put a positive spin on it. They also put a positive spin on the eclipse data, claiming it had astonishing precision. How about bogus precision or manufactured precision? One of the most profound abuses of the eclipse data has to do with precision. In other words, how many significant digits is it possible to read the data? According to Eddington, it was possible to read the data to a precision of 1/100th of an arcsecond. This was also echoed in an article in the Scientific American. How small is 1/100th of an arcsecond? I would guesstimate that it is on par with attempting to determine the width of a human hair with the unaided eye as seen from a distance of 10 feet. According to Ian McCausland, the difference on the edge of the photographic plate was the equivalent of 1/100th of a millimeter. Apparently none of these scientists have one scintilla of awareness of the maximum precision of the equipment and conditions allowed. First of all, the telescope used by Eddington, one physicist informed me, was about on par with the telescope one could buy from Walmart for under $100. Second, the condition under which the data was collected was only slightly better than viewing the bent stars through an erupting volcano. It was 97 degrees that day in Principe and 75 degrees the previous night. This exceeded the allowable temperature range over which the equipment was supposed to operate. Not surprisingly, the focal length of one of the telescopes changed and a backup telescope was used. When the moon passed in front of the sun, it shut down all incident radiation. This must have immediately caused a sharp temperature drop, and instantly the ground and vegetation began to emanate heat. This caused turbulence in the atmosphere and then predictable response, the dancing of the stars on the photographic plates, causing them to be bent hither and yon, some sideways, some backwards. Naturally, this was attributed to accidental error. In other words, if the data supports the theory, it's good. and if it doesn't support the theory, it is accidental error. It is truly amazing how it is possible to get such random errors on the photographic plates that some stars move in totally unpredictable ways while others are bent just the right amount. The 1922 eclipse was also used to support general relativity. Here is an excerpt from Jamal Munshi provided by Marmot. Dr. F. Schneider of the Munich Observatory has published a paper titled The Einstein Shift, an Unsettled Problem, and a plot of shifts for 92 stars for the 1922 eclipse shows shifts going in all directions, many of them going the wrong way by as large of a deflection as those shifted in the predicted direction. Bertoli, Brill, and Krotkov identify 5 sources of errors on the photographic plates. 1. Refraction of light into the sun's corona and/or the Earth's atmosphere. 2. Distortions in the optical system caused by temperature changes during the eclipse. 3. Changes of scale between the eclipse plates and comparison plates. And 4. Distortions in the photographic emulsion while drying. And 5. Errors in measurements of the images on the plates. One of the biggest problems with the eclipse data is that there are at least 5 sources of error on the comparison plates. In order to tell if a star has been bent, it is necessary to compare it to a plate where the stars are away from the influence of the sun, i.e., it is necessary to compare the bent stars to the stars before they are bent. This introduces significant errors in the process. Here is what Poor said about this. 1. Scale differences between 2 plates, e.g. the plates are taken at different localities at different seasons of the year and under radically different atmospheric conditions. 2. Different inclinations of the 2 plates to the optical axis of the telescope. 3. Optical distortion of the lens system. 4. Inaccurate centering of the 2 plates. 5. Inaccurate orientation of the 2 plates during measurement. In the process of clamping the 2 plates to the reference plate, it will always happen that one is twisted a little in reference to the other. So what is the allowable precision of the data considering the limitations of the equipment, the condition of the atmosphere, and the distortions within the photographic plates? A 10-inch diameter telescope under perfect optics can resolve 1 arc second. The Earth's atmosphere also refracts light, and because it is constantly moving, there is a blurring and jittering of images on a telescope. Astronomers call this seeing. Seeing actually dominates diffraction in most cases, and usually limits resolution in practice to 1/2 to 2 arc seconds. Rare is the night at most sites when any telescope, no matter how large its aperture or perfect its optics, can resolve differences finer than 1 arc second. More typical at ordinary locations is 2 to 3 arc seconds seeing or worse. What Eddington did to prove Einstein right was so ridiculous it borders on the sublime. Here is what Eddington did to get the results he wanted according to Poor. 4. Not a single expedition so far reporting has made a systematic study of all the data obtained. In the South American eclipse of 1919, less than 15% of the actual measured data was used in obtaining the announced result. All non-radial components of the actual measures were discarded as accidental errors. That's right. Eddington threw out over 85% of the data. If you throw out all the data that differs from the results predicted by general relativity, what remains, by definition, will be consistent with general relativity. 7. The actual stellar displacements, when freed from all assumptions, do not show the slightest resemblance to the predicted Einstein deflections. They do not agree in direction, in size, or in the rate of decrease with distance from the sun. 8. The actual measured displacements, if real, can best be explained by some refractive effect of the Earth's atmosphere, by a combination of the Courvoisier effect of daylight refraction and of temperature effects caused by the passing of the eclipse shadow. The Alice in Wonderland properties of the data are well displayed. Trumpler, as in all of his other calculations and reductions, assumes the truth of the very law the eclipse data was organized to test, and he naturally finds that his results are best represented by the law from which they were obtained. Not a single one of the fundamental concepts of varying time, of warped or twisted space, of simultaneity, or of the relativity of motion is in any way involved in Einstein's prediction of, or formulas for, the deflection of light. The many and elaborate eclipse expeditions have therefore been given a fictitious importance. Their results can neither prove nor disprove the relativity theory. At best, their results can prove that light is retarded by gravitational action, and it is retarded by a certain definite amount. But the actual results of the eclipse expeditions do not even prove this. Not a single expedition so far reporting has made use of effective checks or controls for eliminating the effects of temperature upon the instruments or for determining the possible effects of abnormal atmospheric conditions during the eclipse. An examination of the various tables of the deflections observed shows that many of them are far away from the quantities predicted. The quantity approximating the predicted one is obtained by averaging a selected few of the observations. Any reader, though far from an expert astronomer or physicist, who will study the description of the apparatus used in these observations and a large margin of error possible by reason of defects therein, will readily comprehend that in view of the required delicacy of measurement of the things observed, of the observed phenomena, the greatest caution in the analysis of the results is necessary. This didn't bother Eddington or other proponents of the eclipse data. Apparently, none of these scientists paid much attention to the fact that the data collected by Eddington was almost non-existent. They are all good of the sun, showing a remarkable prominence, but the cloud has interfered with the star images. The last 6 photographs show a few images which I hope will give us what we need. The cloudy weather upset my plans, and I had to treat the measures in a different way from what I intended. Consequently, I have not been able to make any preliminary announcements of the result. But one plate that I measured gave a result agreeing with Einstein. Here's what I think Eddington did. He worked backwards, i.e. he knew what deflection he wanted, so he invented the correct length of deflection so that it created the results he wished to obtain. It is either that, or he was completely incompetent as a scientist. A basic concept that seems to be missing from the popular understanding of science is one of the most fundamental and well understood aspects of life, survival of the fittest. This repudiates directly the whole concept of the ivory tower image of the lay public. Scientists are just like every American. Some are good people, some are bad people. By some quirk of fate, the latter seem to have gravitated to theoretical physics. Their vicious, unfounded opposition to cold fusion and its practitioners, their extravagant and continuing puffing up of Einstein, and their insatiable appetite for multi-billion-dollar toys, hot fusion machines, neutrino detectors, and particle accelerators, to name 3, siphon off limited funds from legitimate scientists. These are bad scientists and bad people. This is what responsible scientists are up against: survival of the fittest. If integrity does not get you wealth, power, and prestige, then why have integrity? These scientists have learned from the maestro, Einstein. I have never obtained any ethical values from my scientific work. Some people might view this as paranoia, but as some wag commented, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean that they are not out to get you. As long as I am below the radar, I did get hammered in the blogs for my Einstein plagiarism articles, physicists will ignore me. If I am a threat to their acquisition of wealth, power, and prestige, they will unleash the dogs of war where anything goes. This is the second shot I have fired across the bow of the HMS Big Physics, and I've got the iceberg on my side. Here is what I am up against. This will resonate with low-energy nuclear reactions, aka cold fusion, LENR, investigators. From the website, The Suppression of Inconvenient Facts in Physics, The Big Bang Scandal, one will find the following introduction to the article, a statement by Brian Martin. Quote, textbooks present science as a noble pursuit for truth, in which progress depends on questioning established ideas. But for many scientists, this is a cruel myth. They know from bitter experience that disagreeing with the dominant view is dangerous, especially when that view is backed by powerful interest groups. Global warming. Call it suppression of intellectual dissent. The usual pattern is that someone does research or speaks out in a way that threatens a powerful interest group, typically a government, industry, or professional body. As a result, representatives of that group attack the critic's ideas or critic personally by censoring writing, blocking publications, denying appointment or promotions, withdrawing research grants, taking legal actions, harassing, blacklisting, spreading rumors. These scientists could give lessons to the White House plumbers. Does this sound familiar to low-energy nuclear reaction investigators? So now we have 2 entirely different disciplines in physics where the practitioners appear to have acted in a sleazy manner. As a reaction to this article, I predict we will see a third example. 3 strikes and you're out. The physics community will eventually see a razing of theoretical physics to the ground and the appearance of the next generation of physicists, the process-dominated physicists, are about to replace the mathematicians in physics. This revolution is apt to be bloody. #electric universe, my brothers. One potential fallout of this article: we are about to see a schism in big physics over the next 2 years where the applied physicists, men and women who actually observe and measure real processes and promote concepts about the physical world, will stand in direct opposition to the theoretical physicists who diddle in mathematics. These are the people such as Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking. The mathematicians who have brought us special relativity, general relativity, the Big Bang Theory, black holes, and string theory will cling to the eclipse hoax for dear life, for to abandon it now would expose the soft underbelly of their dubious, quote, science. Applied physicists will be furious with their peers for dragging them into this morass, and as a result being tarred with the same brush impacting theoretical physicists. The hoax of 1919 will ultimately prove to be a profound embarrassment to every physicist with integrity. The applied physicists will repudiate the theoretical physicists because, unlike theoretical physicists, they will know and understand the implications and significance of the accuracy and precision of data read during the eclipse. Summary and conclusions. Science connects the known to the known. What we have in theoretical physics today is a castle in the sky, the mathematical universe, which has as its foundation in quicksand the eclipse data. The desperate attempt to provide a physical representation of general relativity has resulted in scientists acting in ways that they ought not to act. This includes the enthusiastic approval of the corrupted and derogated data from the eclipse. We have an entire class of scientists so bent on puffing up Einstein in a concerted effort to get a stranglehold on wealth, power, and prestige that they have overlooked the most basic pursuit of good science, the unbiased search for truth. Theoretical physicists have substituted agenda-driven science for real science, the unwavering pursuit of truth. According to theoretical physicists, special relativity is settled science. 3,798 papers critical of special relativity have been published, much to the ennui of the big physics. This is what big physics means by settled science, i.e., thousands of papers disagreeing with special relativity are just ignored. Theoretical physicists are no strangers to agenda-driven science. Annalen der Physik published 5 agenda-driven, plagiarized, internet-quality papers by Einstein in 1905. These should have died in the review process. Instead, we are being led to believe that this is the most profound accomplishment of any scientist in the 20th century. No reputable editor today in any scientific discipline would touch the Einstein papers with a 10-foot pole. But these agenda-driven, plagiarized, internet-quality papers are being called the miracle year by physicists. The self-delusion theoretical physicists have for the hoax of 1919 challenges their competence to speak to the issue of science in general. They apparently lack the skill to distinguish real science from fantasy science. The question must be asked: why are we funding scientists who seem intent on promoting fantasy science at the expense of real science and real scientists? The reader may wonder, why is a little icon worship bad? So it distorts the funding of process a little, so what? Icon worship in this country is directly responsible for our failed energy policy and the implications that it has for national security. When Einstein became famous, he served as a symbol of genius that spilled over into the general perception that somehow only physicists were doing really good science. According to Blake, some physicists think that the only revolutions in science of any significance in the 20th century are chaos, quantum physics, and relativity. Of course, such things as the Genome Project pale in comparison. This distorts funding. Where this distortion has been disastrous for Americans is in terms of our energy policy. We have spent over $15 billion funding the big physics toy, the hot fusion machine. One minor problem with this machine: one of the primary fuels for hot fusion, tritium, costs $1 million per ounce. So why did we fund the hot fusion program? Physicists and the funding agencies managed to funnel billions of dollars of no-bid contracts to their buddies at MIT. This was how Dick Cheney learned how to funnel no-bid contracts to Halliburton. He learned it from big physics. One of the first things on the agenda of Congress should be to fire every physicist working for the federal funding agencies or as a federally funded public persona. These scientists have no business doling out contracts to their buddies in academia. Since physicists appear to have a chronic problem telling the truth, it is a bad idea to have physicists or astronomers like David Levy providing a public face to the scientific community. For if they do so, the American public will have a totally bogus idea of what good science is, what the scientific method is, or what good scientific research is. Think about it. As a geologist, wouldn't I want to invest billions of dollars to harness geothermal energy? Incidentally, this would provide a whole lot of geologists with a good living. If I were a biologist, wouldn't I want to spend billions of dollars trying to create cellulose biofuels or develop new ways to genetically alter algae to produce hydrogen in large quantities? If I were a chemist, wouldn't I want to spend billions of dollars developing better batteries that were cheaper, more efficient, and longer lasting? Wouldn't I be interested in funding for new energy technologies and ways to make solar panels cheaper and more efficient? If I were an atmospheric scientist, wouldn't I be interested in placing large windmill complexes on ocean platforms to generate electricity from large offshore complexes or in other desirable areas? So why do we have a hot fusion program? Physicists convince our wonderful leaders in Washington to have the best and newest toy on the block. Hot fusion is a boondoggle, pork for physicists, the Vietnam and Iraq of our energy policy. By the time, if ever, hot fusion machines come online in quantity, say 1,000 megawatt plants, global warming will be terminal. Aside from that, considering the huge R&D cost, the electricity from the first 100 plants will cost over $1 per kilowatt hour. When one factors in Murphy's Law, the downtime of the plants will be over 50%. If the money spent on hot fusion had been divvied up to the other branches of the sciences starting 30 years ago as outlined above, and combined with more fuel-efficient cars, better insulation, and conservation, we would have energy independence today. Big physics gave away a monopoly we had on low-energy nuclear reactions by systematically demonizing, denigrating, and demeaning LENR researchers and branding their research pathological science. Big physics quite clearly is acting against the national security of our country. They deliberately gave away our opportunity to develop cold fusion patents to France, Italy, Israel, South Korea, and Japan by systematically denying them to American inventors. The status of LENR technology today is that inventors can get excess heat reliably on demand in a short period of time. They even get high-energy alpha particles with their LENR devices. If big physics was right about cold fusion being pathological science, the worst that would have happened is that a few perpetual motion machines would have been patented. If they are wrong, they could cost America several $100 billion in lost patent revenues over the next several decades. The enormity of what big physics has done to our country by making us beholden to Saudi Arabia, Iraq in the future, and to Venezuela and Nigeria is beyond belief. Big physics is quite clearly acting in their own self-interest at the expense of our national security and our national interest. And that is the article. Yeah, pretty good, huh? Not as a statistical rigmarole as the last article, but very good. And of course he has all of his references for the article and, just showing in plain and clear terms that the people who have defended Einstein the most in the public realm are making wildly contradictory statements. They contradict their own words in different publications, and they're all just engaged in this mutual puffery and this puffing up of Einstein. And it's only when you take into account the greater kind of economic aspect of this that it starts to make sense. As he's saying, big physics is just like big pharma or big oil or any of the others, right? They have a vested interest in supporting the model that backs up their funding and their theory, right? So they will attack any challenger that potentially could lead to them losing their funding. They have no interest in the pursuit of truth, and as such, they're not real scientists. They're a bunch of quacks. And so to return to the comparison, the original point of this whole video, if we're going to be looking closely at the Dayton Miller data and being extremely critical of his means and his methods and his data and his analysis, well, that's fair. We should always be critical of any theory, right? But if we actually compare the error bar values that are introduced by Tom Roberts in his rebuttal of Dayton Miller's results, we find that the greatest one, the one that he displayed in his graph, which was based on an error bar of 0.8, is still only 20 times greater than the signal that Dayton Miller measured, right? If we look at the comparative error for Einstein, we see that basically it is 5 times greater than what Tom Roberts is claiming. And if we use his other two numbers, which he said value 2 was a 90% probability, we find that actually the error magnitude is below the number 1, which means that actually the signal is real and the error bars are smaller than the signal. So that's it, guys. If you want to, challenge Miller's data, that's fine. Every single theory in the scientific realm should be challenged. But if we're going to, be consistent in our means and our theories and our, whole approach to this whole topic and find the next level of truth that'll allow us to develop that new level of technology, we got to be honest with ourselves. And in being honest with ourselves, we inevitably find that the 1919 eclipse Arthur Eddington measured, supposedly verifying Einstein, is the most bullshit, complete bunk science in the history of science on this entire planet, even eclipsing, pun intended, the global warming fraud, because this is really the pinnacle on which the whole scientific illusion was based, was on Einstein as this new messianic figure, this new savior, by introducing a complete garbage theory that is just so much hogwash. It boggles the mind to think how many genuinely smart people, mathematical people, bought into it. But that's the thing. Mathematically, within the confines of these illogical parameters, it is correct. The only thing is, this whole world isn't connected to reality by anything except that 1919 eclipse. That being said, now we're prepping for Ether Physics 203. There have been many, many, many experiments done since the 1919 eclipse and since Dayton Miller's work, supposedly verifying the predictions of special relativity. And that is what we're going to get into in the next video. We're going to look at the entirety of evidence for and against special relativity and general relativity as developed by Einstein. And we're going to see, are these really supportive of the theory? Are they explained by an alternative theory? And what exactly is the precise error that these people are making when they analyze the results from these experiments? Because if we're using illogical assumptions, we can take perfect mathematical data and come up with totally erroneous conclusions, right? So that's my video today. Hope you guys enjoyed that. A little bit long, I might split it up. But anyway, yeah, let me know if you like this in the comment below. Hit the like button, share, and subscribe. Get it out there to all the big physics nerds who think that Einstein is their Lord and Savior, and just show them there's more going on in this universe. And Arthur Miller, in proving the existence of the ether, was at very, very least 5 times more correct, or 5 times less in error than Einstein was in predicting the results of the 1919 eclipse. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll see you next time. Cheers.